Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Ardalis webinar series. My name is Bethany Estes. I'm an account executive here at Ardalis. Thank you for joining us today for Understanding CMMC Updates and NIST 800-171 Revision 3, How to Prepare for Upcoming CMMC Changes. Today, we're joined by Ardalis President Michael Specca and Sales Engineer Rich Roberts to break down the latest in these regulations and what you need to know to get compliant. So please feel free, submit your questions at any point, and we'll be sure to address them during the Q&A session. Also note, if we don't get to your questions during today's session, an Ardalis representative will reach out to you and will answer your questions fully. The webinar is being recorded and it will be shared with you after today's session. If you do have any questions after today's webinar, please just email marketing@ardalis.com and we can get started. All right, so what is CMMC? So I'm going to cover a few of the baselines for today, just so we're all on the same page. CMMC stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and this is a framework that's developed by the U.S. Department of Defense to enhance the cyber posture of defense contractors and the suppliers. CMMC is designed to improve the protection of CUI and federal contract information by establishing a standardized set of cybersecurity practices and processes. So what is CUI? CUI stands for Controlled Unclassified Information. This is a category of information that the U.S. decided is not classified as classified, so it's not top secret, it's not confidential, but it is still sensitive and requires some sort of protection from unauthorized disclosure. CUI includes a wide range of information, documents, and data that, if exposed, could harm national security, privacy, or other important government interests. History of CUI. So in 2004, the 9/11 Commission report recommended the horizontal sharing of intelligence information transcending individual agencies. This recommendation was expanded by the Presidential Task Force, and this was appointed in 2009. So it includes all information falling within the definition of CUI in the possession or under the control of this executive branch or the federal government. In 2010, the Executive Order 13556 CUI established such a comprehensive controlled unclassified information program in November. And then the order designated the National Archives and Records Administration to serve as the executive agent. So then that was to implement and oversee agency actions to ensure compliance with the order. And then there was a collaborative discussion and consultation between the executive agent and affected agencies to develop and implement that CUI program. And then in 2015, the best way to determine the requirements for a specific type of CUI is now to search that CUI registry. So that contains a complete list of CUI categories, and this document contains 24 categories actually, and then 83 subcategories. And then all of those are defined as either CUI basic or CUI specified. And in 2016, the issuance of the 32 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 2002, that established policy for agencies on designating, handling, and decontrolling information that they identify as CUI. And then that was published as a final rule on September 14th, 2016. Rich, I cannot hear you. I'm having some sound difficulties here.
Hello, how about now?
I can hear you now. Perfect.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Sorry about that. Well, jump right in. We're into NIST SP 800-171 Revision 3. As you can see here, essentially NIST has provided standards that will help the defense industrial base protect against issues with CUI across all non-federal systems, right? They're going to be able to help you get understanding, help you get the necessary security measures in place to secure the federal defense and industrial base with their mission and ensure that they're safeguarding that CUI. Right? On the screen here, what we're looking at essentially is an overview of the number of changes to the security requirements in Rev 3. So inside of Revision 3, there has been an increase in the new revisions. inside of this revision, essentially, there are clear guidance or guidelines on what you need to do to meet these requirements, right? You'll be able to see the requirements essentially are more prescriptive than they were in revision 2. They're not so prescriptive that they will give you a step-by-step set of instructions on how to meet these requirements, but there will give you some specificity around the requirements and ensure that you have what you need to ensure that you meet those standards, right? As you look at the transition mapping here below, you'll be able to see that there are essentially some standards here that are identified. The high number of changes that are significant are shown, but first look at the top where it identifies that there are no significant changes. And the equation there, you see there's no change in the outcome as well. As you move down to this page here, you're going to be able to see that there's some minor changes that are identified, and then there's some changes to the outcomes that are associated there. You see that both of those entries have an 18 on the other side of them. You can see and understand that that means that there is a significant change and there's a larger number of security requirements in the significant change area. Additionally, there's a new requirement and withdrawal requirements. If you look at those, there's one number difference between the two. Essentially, when you add them all up, it looks like there should be roughly the same number of security requirements that you would be adhering to meet the standards, but it's not exactly the case here, as the withdrawing requirements that you can see down below, the 27, those essentially have been not omitted in the standard. They are moved, on the board, essentially included in other security requirements. So the total number of security requirements has increased to 138, as you can see and identified on the page there. This means that the level of effort needed to meet the requirements has increased significantly. So the amount of time it's going to take, the information that you need, and the essentially the domains that you're going to touch has increased to comply with the standards of NIST 800-171 in revision 3. Very important that you get that information and get an understanding of what that looks like so you can prepare for the level of effort that you're going to need to take on when it comes to compliance with the NIST 800-171 and potentially down the road CMMC as it applies. Additionally, on this screen, you'll see the last note there, the new organizational defined parameter. This is the ODP, which you're going to see and hear being mentioned quite a bit from this point on, not just from me, but as you're talking through the requirements and being assessed and having to meet these, compliance needs. The ODPs, or organizational defined parameters, they are in selected security requirements. They're not in all of the requirements, they're in selected security requirements. This is going to allow organizations to make risk-based decisions that are going to satisfy the requirement that they're in. The ODPs, they can be informed, they can be guided by laws or directives, standards, policies, executive orders, or missions, or maybe even the business needs of the organization. This means essentially that the DoD or the federal agencies, they can implement parameters or minimums in relation to the organization defined parameter. Right. So once that is specified, what that's going to do essentially is give you the value and understanding of what that organizational defined parameter is, and it's going to become part of the requirement. Once this happens, you now have documented support on the risk-based decision that was made by the organization. Very important when it comes to meeting the standards, when it comes to preparing for the assessment and preparing and meeting those requirements. Go ahead, next screen. One area to call out, essentially, as we're looking at the noticeable or notable changes in Rev 3, you'll hear in the industry rumbles about FIPS cryptography and it not being required any longer in NIST 800-171. I think that you'll see that it doesn't get called out in the Rev 3, but it does call out the cryptography is required for CUI in transit and at rest. There is a misconception here because the call out is identifying organizational defined parameters to choose the method of cryptography that's essentially used in fulfilling this requirement. As you can see, however, when you identify the organization as the DoD or federal agencies, you can see historically that it's been their preferred method to use for encryption, essentially that is FIPS, has been the preferred method that they've used over time. So the belief that FIPS is going to go away and never come back, I think is a misconception that you'll see these government agencies, or the DoD rather, will continue to use the encryption that they're used to using. Go ahead, next slide. All right, another noticeable or notable requirement that's on the NIST 800-171 Rev 3 is the supply chain risk management requirement. In this, essentially, you're going to have to take control, take reins on the third-party solutions that you may be implementing, whether that's a cloud solutions provider, an MSP, MSSP, or essentially just consultants that you use, on a day-to-day basis. You're essentially going to have to ensure that they are meeting the requirements set forth in this regulation or this standard, identifying this through an independent third party, being able to assess them and ensure that they are meeting the standards as set forth in the requirement. This now is going to help you, or have you help the DIV by essentially making the right choices and the right decisions when you select your partners, when you select your products, and when you select the solutions that you're going to serve with the defense industrial base. Go ahead, next slide. One of the other notable one of the other notable changes essentially is the additional domains. As you can see on the screen here, identified in the bottom right-hand corner, highlighted in green, are the additional domains, starting with the planning phase. This is something that wasn't called out as a practice previously in the NIST 800-171. You actually had to look further down into the document to be able to identify where the planning was, and there were some essentially some assumptions that were made that those types of policies and procedures were in place around cybersecurity programs and assessments essentially associated with, and then the continuous monitoring of that particular program or policies and procedures with the update and review. So this has been implemented into the new revision. Essentially, along with that, the system and service acquisition, as well as supply chain risk management. Totaling here, there are 10 new requirements that are added in. Another level of effort and understanding. These are new additions, not ones that have been moved around the board. So you may not have started with these. So you probably want to pay attention to this area and ensure you have all that you need to either adjust or right size the direction you're moving in to meet these requirements. Another area on this board, just to give you some insight or visibility into what it looks like as far as the new requirements that have come in and new requirements that are essentially added or moved around the board, and ones that don't have any new requirements inside of their families. If you take a look at this, this diagram here, you'll be able to see and understand which ones that you're going to, draw attention to, which ones you may want to focus a little more on, and which ones you want to, kind of dive down and get your hands dirty with. Right. Next slide. So as we move into the NIST 800, revision 3 timeline, this started back in May, where public draft essentially was released. You can go out and see comments of the public draft and be able to get an understanding of what the masses are saying about this release. There's a lot of speculation on what's going to happen, but you can go there and see what's happening today. Essentially, as we move a little further down the timeline, you'll see that the rules submitted for CMMC happened in July. We are, anxiously, or have been anxiously waiting for that final ruling to come out, either proposed or final rule, which today we got some information. We're able to share with you that OIRA actually extended the review period. You have here that the extension was filed today for 30 days. You can see that OIRA is moving that expected final rule essentially to show in November timeframe, 30 days from today. That should be just before the holiday time period. Maybe we get a good gift on our way out of the door, or maybe we get an even better gift on our way back in. Soon to be seen. We'll be able to see and understand what that looks like here soon. As you move into 2024, you see the final submission here, or rather the final publication potentially of revision 800-171 Rev 3 coming in February of 2024. So a lot of time to come up. You do have time to meet it. It is time now. If you get started, you can move in that direction, or at least get some understanding of what's coming and where you need help and where you need to put your time and attention. Go ahead, the next slide. Now, as we reviewed the revision 3, now we're looking at the CMMC timeline. So as we look through this timeline, you can see essentially the rule submission and how it relates. But what I'd like to draw your attention to even more so on this slide is the "You are here" button above the date of October. This is where we are today. You've seen previously that there is a 30-day extension on the rulemaking there, which gives you a little bit more time to do the same thing you're doing today, which is prepare for that C3PO assessment, which is further down the line, coming up in the June, July, August timeframe of 2025. Very important that you take advantage of the time you have right now. It's not much of it. It takes approximately 12 to 18 months for this to go through. If we do receive an interim final rule, that would come in November, which would mean if you start today, you would be a little behind the 8 ball, or essentially, or you're not necessarily ready for that assessment. But there are many of you out there that essentially have been working hard to meet these requirements, have been working hard to get in alignment, and you do have essentially a mechanism that could help you get there. That mechanism essentially will run through here in the next slide. That mechanism essentially is the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program. In this program, you'll be able to get that assessment done as soon as possible. That soon as possible probably won't be tomorrow, probably won't be next week. As I understand it, the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, that the C3POs and the DIBCAC are jointly moving to help the DIB essentially get their supporters, or their contractors in a space where they can demonstrate and show compliance in the areas. The best thing that will come from this thing for you essentially is if you can get in alignment, is there is the reciprocity that has been identified. The DoD is intending to give reciprocity to all of the DIBCAC assessment high achievers that meet that requirement, essentially between now and the time CMMC goes live. When CMMC goes live, the JSV will no longer be in use, so there would be a C3PO going in and finish that and completing that assessment. So in order to get a joint surveillance assessment, first step you'll need to take is to reach out to your C3PO and identify to them that you are ready. They will ask you some questions and move through that process, but start there, and then you too can be one of the ones that gets in the early adoptive program and gets to be the first one to be CMMC level 2 assessed and achieve that certification when it goes live. Next slide. So the False Claims Act, I know there are many of you out there that have no intention on trying to defraud the government, may do it accidentally, or may have done it in error or misjudged. If that is something that happens, essentially, the government has some things in place to identify areas of their concern, which they utilize the False Claims Act to be able to determine whether or not we are meeting the requirements as they have been set forth. The government has the ability to go back and utilize this to to gather information and investigate and find out if there has been wrongdoing or just something that's been omitted. This is not something that essentially is being done and is able to be done, or they're pursuing this like police every day, but it is a safeguard that the government has in place. So those of you who are preparing, those of you who are getting ready, understand that, thoroughness and complete, attention to detail when it comes to going after this compliance is definitely needed to ensure that you fall on the right side of this False Claims Act, which is not having to deal with it. Bye. All right, I'll pass the mic on over to Michael Specca. As he's coming into the meeting, may take a second.
Yeah, sorry, just getting my controls here. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, so for the next couple slides here, we'll just be talking about steps that you can take to get yourself compliant, so different approaches. At Artilus, we've been helping organizations with CMMC for quite a few years now. We actually started before CMMC v1 was finalized. So we're pretty familiar with the requirements and how this has evolved, and we've seen a number of different approaches that people have taken, and we've boiled it down to a handful that we've seen be effective. So I just want to run through those right now and give you guys some ideas about how to move forward. So this 5-step process is a pretty simple one, but it just helps you get your hands around what it is that you were trying to do and what it is that you need in order to be successful. So obviously the first step is the CMMC level that you want to achieve. At this point, with how far CMMC has come, I think a lot of organizations now understand that if you handle CUI or want to pursue work that would require you to handle CUI, then you're going to need to be level 2. And that's going to require the C3PAO third-party assessment. But then how are you going to get there, right? So are we going to put some things in place as we go, or do we want to implement all at once? And then sort of a related question is, are we going to try to get the whole company on board at the same time, or are we going to create a special space for people who do DoD work? And a lot of that boils down to how integrated your operations are and how much of your operations are dedicated towards to providing services to the Department of Defense. For organizations that have a small department or a handful of people that handle CUI, or even though they do a lot of work with the DoD, they only occasionally have to handle CUI, it makes sense to create a small separate environment to do that. And then, as you grow, think about bringing the rest of the organization into a CMMC compliant environment. For other organizations where the whole firm works on DoD contracts, and that most of those are going to involve handling CUI, it makes sense to get everything done at once. So once you know how big of a bite you're going to take out of this apple, then really scoping out the systems and data that you need to protect. So even organizations that have a lot of people, or a significant portion or even all of their employees in a controlled environment, still might, for various reasons, operate some of their environment just in a non-controlled space, in either a CMMC level 1 space or a corporate space. This is especially true of organizations that do a lot of work with commercial customers, or in industries that don't have as significant of regulatory controls as CMMC is putting in place. But once you have your hands around, who in the organization, then you can get your hands around, all right, what tools do they use? A key issue that comes up here is, a lot of us are in the cloud at this point, or we're on our way into the cloud, and a lot of us use third-party SaaS products to operate our businesses, whether that's something as simple as QuickBooks Online, or a more sophisticated ERP system, or a more sophisticated construction management system or estimating system. There's a lot of tools out there that people rely on that are third-party SaaS tools. And if you do anything right after this webinar, and as you're trying to think about what it is that you need to go after, take a look if you are using some of those third-party products as key parts of your business process, and do they have a FedRAMP version of their software or of their service. It's thinking about external systems that we rely on is something that gets frequently overlooked. And then, of course, even though you get your entire organization into a CMMC compliant environment, now you're still wrestling with this issue of, we've got this key system, and the key system doesn't have doesn't have an option that we know would meet the requirements. So what are we going to do about that? Question 4, where are you going to go technology-wise? This is another space where things kind of are different between larger and smaller organizations. So if you've got a big pre-existing technology investment, infrastructure investment, then you're probably going to want to build on that. If you don't, then you've got more options in terms of which way you go. And typically, one of the most cost-effective ways is going to be to get on somebody's cloud. One thing I'll mention here about tech, especially if you're a smaller organization, and this is not just a cybersecurity issue, this is anytime you're looking at a technology investment. There's always this debate between, best of breed. So I'm going to go pick 4 or 5 different solutions and then integrate them, or getting on, a single solution like we're just going to run Microsoft. And if you're a smaller organization that doesn't have a lot of IT resources, that best of breed approach is pricey over time, even if the assembly of that stuff might look cheaper than the suite. When you do all the work of getting everything integrated and keeping it integrated and getting the data flowing from one system to the other to make sure that you've got a complete picture of what you're doing, that can be pretty time consuming. So if you are going to go with the solution, make sure that your integrator, your provider, can give you sort of the integration tool that they've already built to help you stay on top of being able to bring those systems together instead of you trying to figure out how to do it yourself. Finally, what do you have internally? So IT departments are pretty stressed as it is, and a lot of smaller defense contractors don't have an IT department. They have somebody who's dual-hatted, and they may not have policy experts. So the question of what do we need to bring in externally versus what do we have is an important one to start thinking through. The other thing I'd mention is that if you don't have a government contract attorney, you should probably get one. We're not lawyers. Most of our colleagues out in the market are also not lawyers. And at the end of the day, you're trying to comply with the regulation and with contractual requirements, and you're going to want to know. You're going to ask questions about, is this a position that we want to be in? Is this a solution that we think is good enough? And us and everybody else, including the C3PAOs that are earning assessment, can share what we've seen and what we've been told will pass and what we've been trained will pass. But sometimes there's nothing like the advice of an attorney to help you with a complex question, especially if you're trying to determine if any sort of cybersecurity event that has taken place in your organization qualifies as an incident and requires reporting. Okay, let's hop over to the next slide. And I just want to talk for a minute about kind of the 2 major offers that we've seen evolve in the market for the last 4 years. So I think I mentioned we're also defense contractors. We're a cybersecurity firm that works with the DoD. And so we started trying to figure out how to make CMMC work for us, and then decided to make an offering for other defense contractors. And there were really 2 paths that evolved as we were looking at this. Path number 1 is this concept of a consulting service that's going to start with a gap analysis. And if you're talking to a MEP, and there's plenty of providers out there that also recommend this approach. They're going to say, start with a gap analysis, understand what you have, and understand what of those things are and aren't compliant with 800.171. They're going to recommend the development of a remediation plan. They'll probably have services to execute some portion of the remediation plan. And I mean, this is a service that we offer primarily for larger organizations, and I'll explain why it's for larger organizations in a minute. If you're going to go down this path, we've seen a handful of pitfalls. Talked to customers who spent money with another service and then felt like they weren't really where they needed to be. And usually it boiled down to two major gaps in the service. One is some of the controls and some of the domains in 800.171 are not something you do once, right? They're not a project. They're a process that you implement and run all the time. Security monitoring, or MDR type services is the most obvious example of that. And since that doesn't fit into the model of performing a project for you, a good provider, if they don't at least evaluate what you're doing and give you recommendations, will at least say, there's 14 domains and our services cover an analysis of, our services cover an analysis of only 14 domains or only 12 domains. And then you at least know where the gap is between what they're telling you and what you need to look at. There are others that won't. They'll say, you'll be compliant if you use our services, but then when you dig deeper, they're missing some of the controls or some of the domains in 800.171. They also should be talking with you about how you stay compliant, whether they offer a managed service or a subscription service, or whether they recommend firms you can buy a subscription service from. But they should be acknowledging that after you put these processes in place, you have to maintain them, you have to run them. And if they don't tell you that, I would look for a provider who does. Generally, this approach is very cost effective if you have an investment that's worth remediating. So if you've got a significant technology investment that is fairly complex, maybe a lot of on-premises resources, I wouldn't worry too much about manufacturing floors and things like that in this environment, because you can definitely handle those on either solution. But if you've got if you're a large organization with a big, especially on-premises based infrastructure, replacing that has the potential to be quite expensive and quite disruptive to your organization. So identifying the gaps and remediating the gaps, while not necessarily the cheapest solution, will probably be the one that gets you the furthest, the fastest. The other group of providers that have evolved, of which Tesseract is one, is a managed service that essentially recommends that you either implement our security controls or you migrate to a new environment that has our security controls in it. And that can look like how we do it, which is it's your environment, right? So you'll buy a cloud, and then we'll configure and run your cloud for you. And then others already have pre-configured clouds that they want you to rent from them. This also looks like somebody who's willing to talk to you about the scope of 800.171 and doesn't leave you hanging as far as the things that they don't do. And the best way to know what they do and don't do is to ask for a shared responsibility matrix, which should clearly identify which controls are your responsibility and which controls will be handled by the provider. Here, the solution that I think you can be wary of, it works really well if you have a very small self-contained CUI processing unit. But if you need some amount of variability in what you're doing, just look for a provider that isn't going to force you to be 100% on their systems and their processes. It's certainly possible to keep the burden low, maybe not the IT burden low when implementing 800.171, but certainly the business burden. So we have ways of doing this that don't disrupt your key experts, that don't stop you from, allowing your developers to do the development they need or the engineers to do the engineering they need. So just be careful that you're not getting in a situation where you're going to be told too much what to do. Even though it's a managed service, a lot of us have flexibility built into our services. Obviously, we'd love it if you called us, and we'll be sure to let you know if we don't think that your business is a good fit for our services. But hopefully it is, and this is something we can help you out with. And I think Bethany's going to talk a little bit more about that before we.
Thanks, Michael. So taking the next steps here. So depending on your situation, where you're at, there's a couple things that you can do. You can get your business risk assessment. So we do that. We do business risk assessments that'll analyze where you guys are at. And then we'll be able to go through what you guys are currently doing and see if there's any gaps that we can fill there. And then there's the NIST 800-171 self-assessment tool. So you can take a look at our webpage, and I'm sure there's others out there that you can use to do a self-assessment for yourself and see if you can go through the questions on your own to see if there's anything that you need to fill out there and try to find the gaps there. You can visit our resource library for more content. We've got lots of white papers and blogs and advisory articles. There's more webinars that we've done, such and such, that's on our website. So there's a ton of resources out there that we try to get you guys so you understand what's going on. And then you can start a free Tesseract trial, which is what we've been doing recently. We've been doing free trials. It goes through your risk assessment. It goes through the types of things that you're going to need to meet CMMC compliance. It's more of kind of like a consulting where we will analyze where you guys are at, see what kind of policy needs to be put in place, help you, figure out what needs to be migrated, lots of different things there. So if you want to start a free trial, feel free to head over to our webpage and click on the free trial link. So now we're going to begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please submit it through the question feature. Note that if we don't get to your question today during our session, Artilist, one of our representatives, will reach out to you and answer any questions that you might have directly. So we're going to begin with our first question. Let me pull up your all's questions here. All right, our first question. So how does NIST 800-171 apply to subcontractors or third-party vendors? For either Rich or Michael.
That's for you, Bethany. No, we went over that just briefly. The 1-800 call tech you're going to need to do. No, I'm kidding. So in 800-171, essentially what you're going to need to do is adhere to third-party risk management. It's how it's essentially going to apply. If they are a customer of yours, if they are a partner of yours, essentially they will be flow through that you will have to follow. They would have to meet the same security requirements that you would have to meet for NIST 800-171.
Okay. All right, thanks, Rich. Are there any best practices or tools that can facilitate the implementation?
Sure. A company like Artlist or another advisor that could help you understand where you are today, what types of CUI you may be handling, what types of services that you're providing, and they could build a program that would help you get there. What we've done, I believe, is not fixate, but we started with identifying the platform that you could essentially host your your CUI, or you could identify a platform that would be able to protect your CUI and be able to use that and there's a starting point, and then build your program around that.
Okay, thank you. How often should an organization review and update its compliance status?
Oh, well, it depends. There are compliance requirements that go over different periods of time. There are things that you have to do daily. There are things that essentially flow through weekly. And then now with the organization defined parameters, there could be an undefined period. Maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly. So therefore, it really depends on the requirements that you're following and the requirements you're trying to meet as it relates to your certification goals or your compliance needs.
What is the smallest company that you've brought into compliance with 800-171? There's kind of a two-parter. So what's the smallest company?
What is the smallest company that we've done with? So we
Mhm.
work with a large range of companies. We've done it with a company that's been the size of one. We've gotten them to the NIST 800-171 requirement, space and place where they're meeting those requirements, and we've gone as high as hundreds of employees in there. Doesn't want to identify specifically because there's some that we're working with currently that are in, the high hundreds and some in the lower hundred range.
And then the second part to that question is, what is that shortest time frame that you've ever been able to bring a company into compliance?
The shortest time frame. So I don't know what the actual time frame is, but I will tell you that we've been able to move as fast as the customer has been able to move. There are certain things that when building out these programs and moving to meet we've done it in as low or as little as 1 month. And so we could do it in 1 month, or we could do it in 2 months or 3 months. It really depends on how fast, we're able to get responses from you and how fast we can execute on the program.
Okay, thank you. So can you kind of, this question says, when will Rev 3 be included in the CMMC requirements? So there's something that, can you kind of break that down? Is there like an actual date that we'd be able to see?
Rich, did you catch that question? I think that one's to you.
No, I did not. Sorry.
Do you need me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay, it's when will Rev 3 be included in the CMMC requirements?
When will Rev 3 be included in the CMMC requirements? So there is a timeline that we reviewed, and we have to wait for final publication or final ruling on that. That essentially has been projected to be in the neighborhood of 2024. I think it's February, March of 2024. And the other part to that, though, is once the final ruling comes into play, there needs to be some time omitted or put in place for the assessment to be set up. The items that need to be assessed need to be, put into the assessment. So essentially, that's going to take a little more time. So I would say sometime in between, probably 9 to 12 months from the final rule that comes out, and potentially that would be, I think that's March of next year. So we're looking close to 2025.
Okay. So as an MSP, Artlist can really only help protect our CUI enclave per se. Is that correct?
No, this is Michael. Sorry, I don't know where my camera went. Let me try to pop that back on. Yeah, so we provide IT services to commercial environments as well. And generally, we do that for firms that are in some sort of regulated industry. So they have some reason to comply with something like 800-171, something like that, or with 800-171 itself. But a number of our defense contractor customers that want or that are operating a commercial environment as well and need services for that commercial environment will take on. There's a couple of interesting wrinkles with that. The biggest one is that our operations and the operations of anybody who's serving anybody who's dealing with CUI, especially CUI specified types like ITAR, where you can't have exposure to any sort of foreign nationals. We can't outsource our support functions to other countries. Now, some people would say that's a benefit, and some people would say that's a problem, depending on how much they value having all of the resources be in the US and be US persons, versus being able to get some cost savings by having certain kinds of IT issues sent overseas. So that's really the trade-off that you're going to be making when you're deciding whether or not to go with a company like ours handling both of your environments, or whether you want to get a separate company. We also work with existing MSPs. So if you have an MSP in your organization that you like the way they do their IT support, our lower service levels will, where we would ordinarily be giving your IT staff information about what you need to do for your environment, we could just pass that on to your MSP. We can pass that on to your MSP as part of our service. So it really depends on what you value in terms of a provider. If you want one, the proverbial one throat to choke, and if you want just have a single source, and you like the idea of all the personnel being U.S. personnel, then having a firm like us do both environments makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Does the OIRA extension increase the likelihood that we will go right into a final rule?
I'm sorry, Bethany, could you repeat that one?
Yes, does the OIRA extension increase the likelihood that we will go right into a final rule?
I think we could speculate on that one.
Yeah. You got a coin to flip?
You got a coin. I'll take heads, or tails never fails, right? Now, as I understand it, the CMMC rulemaking has essentially all flowed through as a interim final, and there's been speculation that this one will follow suit. All speculation. We can't tell whether or not they've crossed every T and dotted every I now, and they just needed 30 more days to ensure that it is right, or I can't tell what that is. I can speculate that it's followed suit previously. Maybe it's going to do that again. But Michael, maybe you have a better take on that.
No, my advice on questions like this is that the tea leaves are so hard to read, and they've been so hard to read from the beginning. And so, really the best approach is to, get compliant as soon as you think is reasonable for your business goals and your budget. The longer the wait, the higher the risk of a couple of things, right? One, the higher the risk that rules go final fast, and the higher the risk that firms like us and, our friends in the C3PAO community are booked out for, months and months at the point that you decide to buy. So, sooner is better, but also sooner costs money. So, understanding exactly what you need and trying to, shop around for a firm that has a solution that really matches your business needs at a reasonable price. And like I was saying earlier, I would just steer clear of the absolute cheapest unless you get a really clear description of what it is that they're actually giving you. Unfortunately, there are unscrupulous vendors out there who, want to tell you that you're going to be all fine if you just give them a couple $1,000s, and it's rarely true.
Yeah. Okay. Is Tesseract more of a cloud solution or like a virtual machine, or is it more like a total infrastructure overhaul?
It's probably the last one, but I don't think I'd characterize it as a total infrastructure overhaul unless that's what you need. Typically, so it is cloud-based, right? The identities, so all your logins and a lot of your storage is all going to be cloud-based. If you remember back, we were talking about different third-party applications and how they run. If you want to get your stuff off your on-premises servers, which really reduces a lot of your compliance burden because you don't have physical systems that you got to protect inside your environment, moving those into the cloud could be part of that update. So running those on virtual servers in the GCC High environment instead of on a box in your space. But we certainly recognize that customers, especially those in manufacturing and engineering, have technology in their building that has to stay in their building. So incorporating that into the program is an important part of the service that we offer with Tesseract. We do have virtual options, entirely virtual options. So our customers that really just need a small environment for a subset of their organization, or they have a lot of field workers. So you're out in a shipyard or on a base or at a construction site. And being in the cloud is really an advantage for your ability to access your data from anywhere. We have put together environments that are entirely inside the cloud, but that's not the only way we do it. I don't know if that answers your question, whoever asked that question. So if you want to run a follow-up, we'll certainly try to answer that more.
Okay, and then is there any documentation of a specific score USG is looking for in SPRS?
Oh, yeah, I've seen a lot of numbers, and different customers have different goals. So I know somebody was asking a question about speed earlier. We had an organization that had made a decision that they needed to be over 90, I think, within 3 months. So that was our target, and we got them over 90 in less than 3 months. And like the organization that we got done in a month, they were very responsive to our questions and very interested in pushing things out in a timely fashion. But in terms of the number, I'd say the place that we've heard about it the most being coming from the government is people who are advised that in order to win a bid, they have to have at least, X number in spurs. And I guess eventually all of us have to be 110, at some point.
Mm. All right, the next question. I assume there's MDM capabilities with your services/solutions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a number of different user types that are part of our subscription, from email only up to a full endpoint experience where you've got a piece of hardware, a desktop or a laptop that you're connecting from. But in general, everything but the lightest weight of those includes some form of management, whether you want to be the kind of organization that really controls the risk by buying and providing your own mobile devices, right? Corporate owned and corporate controlled mobile devices. We have other options in our standard suite that is more of a BYOD, here's how we can control the data space on the phone, so that if people are viewing CUI on their private phone, it's not accessible to any other part of the phone, and you can wipe it if the phone gets lost, things like that. So pretty much the different flavors of mobile device management that Microsoft supports in GCC High, we offer those.
All right. And our next question, is it possible to have an assessment as part of the JSBAP this year?
Is it possible, is the queue already full, or, the things that we've heard, and I think, our peers in the industry have heard, and they tell you the same thing, is that the AB and the government says two things. One, the queue is full, and two, people are often not ready when they get to them. So don't let the fact that the queue is full be the reason why you don't apply. Because if if you don't pass the sniff test, they're not going to put the resources into doing the whole assessment, and then that moves the queue up.
All right. Well, I think that concludes our webinar for today. I want to thank our audience for joining us today, as well as my speakers for making this a great presentation. We have now concluded today's session. If you didn't get your question, again, as an Artilus representative, I'll reach out to you, or one of my colleagues will reach out to you and answer your question directly. We're going to be sending out follow-up emails with our webinar recording as well, and then some of those other helpful resources that I talked about on the topics that we've covered today. And if you have any other questions or need any more information, please feel free to reach out to us at marketing@artilus.com. We'll be happy to assist you. If you're looking for more information on Artilus and our services, visit us online at artilus.com. And thank you guys for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time at the Artilus webinar series.
Thank you for hosting us, Bethany.
Thank you.